in, in the second session of this IFP NRC Pediatric Pulmonology General Club. And today with us, our chairperson, sir, Dr. Rawat, sir, and our coordinator, Dr. Indu Khosla, ma'am, is just joining. And she is also session mentor. And our national expert, Dr. Matthew, sir, and our session expert, Dr. Tanu Singhal, and she is a consultant in pediatrics and infectious disease in Kokilaben Hospital, Mumbai. And our presenter, Dr. Tanvi Modi, she is a fellow in pediatric pulmonology from the Narayana Health SRC Children Hospital, Mumbai. So, without causing much delay, I am handing over. I think madam is not here. So, Dr. Tanvi, you may start, please.
Good evening, everyone. Respected ma'am, panelists, all the experts, thank you for giving me this opportunity. I would like to begin. I'm Dr. Tanvi Modi, a first-year IP NRC Fellow in Pediatric Pulmonology at Narayana Health SRCC Children's Hospital at Haji Ali, Mumbai. My guide and mentor is Dr. Indu Khosla, ma'am, who is a consultant pediatrician and pediatric pulmonology and sleep medicine at SRCC. My topic that I have chosen for today's journal review club is the efficacy of azithromycin combined with intravenous immunoglobulin in the treatment of refractory mycoplasma pneumonia in children, a meta-analysis. Before I begin about analyzing the article, I would like to first shed light on the background of why I have chosen this particular article and this particular topic. So in the last 3 years, especially post-COVID, we have seen mycoplasma making global headlines. Just a few snapshots of that. Mycoplasma pneumonia seen a rise. This is from our very own Times of India. There are CDC in the New York Times. CDC has given guidelines. A lot of other Southeast Asian countries like Japan, China, South Korea, even England in the Euro surveillance has cited an unusual surge in children's pneumonia linked to mycoplasma pneumoniae. Also, there are newer trends in resistance which were noticed everywhere. So I would like to highlight the global trends in macrolide resistant mycoplasma pneumonia, which has been seen all over the world. So starting from, again, CDC, they've shown a higher incidence of resistance in Asian countries right from 2012, which has been picked up now. This is a systematic review which was published on the JAMA network, showing that the highest density of resistance is there in the Southeast Asian countries. This is why, to increase awareness, and because we're all facing so much severe mycoplasma now in daily practice and daily experience and having a hard time treating them, I thought that this article would be clinically relevant. Without further ado, I'd like to just begin on what is refractory mycoplasma pneumonia or RMPP. It's nothing but a difficult to treat mycoplasma pneumonia. The old criteria given by Tamura et al. In 2008, when they found the first case in a 9-year-old girl, was prolonged fever and deterioration of clinical and radiological findings after a reasonable antimicrobial therapy for 7 days. But latest guidelines in 2021 in community-acquired pneumonia in China, it states that RMPP should be considered for patients who have been on macrolides for 7 days or longer, but still have aggravated clinical signs, persistent fever, and progressive pulmonary imaging. Recently, macrolide-resistant M. pneumoniae has become increasingly prevalent and is one of the contributing factors to refractory mycoplasma. This is often confused with severe mycoplasma, which meets the criteria for severe pneumonia and has a propensity to develop into respiratory failure requiring prolonged ICU stay. And these are often used interchangeably or confused. So my article today was published in BMC Pediatrics Journal by Shen et al., it's a Chinese study It was published in October 2024 and article 678. The journal had a 5-year journal impact factor of 2.4. I have considered many articles prior to choosing this, which are you comparing the use of azithromycin along with glucocorticoids as immunosuppressive therapy rather than IVIG. And because glucocorticoids are a much less expensive option, I had considered that initially because they would be more relevant to our population. But there is a dearth of reliable data and standardized data on that. So that is one of the scope of future research. Coming to my article, we have analyzed it by the PRISMA 2020 guidelines, which is the preferred reporting items for systematic reviews and meta-analysis. It's a 27-point checklist, and I will analyze the article point by point based on the PRISMA guidelines. Some of the other methods are the consort for RCTs, stroke for observational studies, START for diagnostic test accuracy, etc. This is just an overview of the 27 points of the PRISMA checklist, which we will be covering. The first point begins with the title and the abstract. The first is title has to identify the report as a systematic review. So even though our title states that it is a meta-analysis, it does not characteristically say that it is a systematic review, though meta-analysis is the method to analyze data from a systematic review. Secondly, there is a separate point or separate list of points of 20 points for the abstracts, and I have not shown it over here because it would increase the duration of talk, but the abstract meets that 20-point checklist. The introduction of the article, the rationale is that the article says there is a sustained systemic inflammatory response and macrolide resistance as a possible mechanism of RMPP with unsatisfactory treatment guidelines. Other adjuvants to azithromycin, including traditional Chinese remedies, glucocorticoids, and IVIG, have been evaluated, but there is no standardization, as I mentioned earlier. The objective of this study was to see the synergistic effects of azithromycin combined with IVIG through a meta-analysis, providing effective data support for clinical use and application. So with this, it met the points of a clear rationale and an explicit statement of objectives. The study method next, it gives a clear eligibility criteria of inclusion and exclusion. The inclusion criteria into the study were randomized control trials, cohort studies, or case control studies. RMPP was diagnosed based on the criteria I mentioned earlier. Fever prolonged more than 37.5 degrees Celsius, lasting more than 7 days. Worsening of clinical symptoms despite macrolide antibiotic treatment, and radiological evidence of pneumonia progression. The age considered was less than 12 years, and males and females were both included. The intervention group was, the interventions considered, the treatment group were azithromycin plus IVIG, whereas the control group were considered as those who had received only azithromycin therapy. And specific clinical efficacy measures were reported in the study, and we will define them later. The studies that were excluded were non-original research like review articles, abstracts, expert opinions, and summaries. Studies which had unclear research designs or incomplete data which did not give adequate data to be extracted. Studies which had repetitive publications or overlaps where they were not including pediatric patients, and non-Chinese or non-English literature. Hence, they gave a very clear eligibility criteria, and this is also checked. Our next point is about the information sources. Literature search was conducted in major electronic databases: PubMed, Cochrane, Embase, Web of Science, CNKI, and the Chinese Wangfang and VIP. The search was between 2006 to March 2024. The start date was not specified as which month. The keywords used in English and the corresponding keywords in Chinese were azithromycin, IVIG, children, MPP, and refractory pneumonia. Relevant literature was reviewed. Manual searches were done to minimize the errors, and the languages were limited to English and Chinese. So the information sources and search strategy were very transparent, and hence they were reliable. The literature was screened. The preliminary literature was screened by the title independently by 2 researchers. After the titles were approved, the abstracts again were reviewed independently by 2 researchers based on the inclusion and exclusion criteria. If there was any literature that was potentially eligible and full texts were not available, an attempt was made to obtain the full texts. And the full texts again were independently evaluated by 2 reviewers. And in case of any discrepancy, it was resolved through a third expert. For all the included studies, quality assessment was done using the Cochrane Collaboration Risk of Bias tool for randomized and Newcastle-Ottawa scale for non-randomized studies. This is the flowchart for the literature screening. The records identified, then the records removed before screening, then the records screened were after the abstracts were approved. After reading the abstracts which were excluded, out of all the ones that were included, the reports that were retrieved, assessed for eligibility again, and finally what were included were 15 studies. Data extraction again was independently done by 2 researchers so that there wouldn't be any conflict, and any conflict was resolved by a third party. The extracted data included the basic information of the article, like the lead author, publication year, study type, and sample size, participant characteristics, and outcome measures. This met the points of the checklist, that the selection process and the data collection process was transparent and very clear and independent, and quality assessment was done to minimize bias. The outcomes measured were clearly defined. There were 6 outcomes measured. The first one was clinical efficacy rate. Clinical efficacy rate, to make it an objective measurement, was divided into markedly effective, effective, or ineffective. Markedly effective were those where the symptoms completely disappeared and the chest X-ray showed more than 50% resolution of the infiltrates. Effective ones was where there was some symptomatic improvement but not complete, and the chest X-ray showed less than 50% improvement. Ineffective was when any of the above criteria were not met or there was clinical worsening. The efficacy rate was calculated by the markedly effective plus effective cases by the total number of cases expressed as a percentage. The second outcome was the time of defervescence of fever in days. The third was disappearance of the time of pulmonary rales. Fourth was the time of disappearance of cough. Fifth was the duration of hospital stay. And sixth was the total incidence of any adverse reactions. So this made the data items and the list of all outcomes very specific and compatible with each outcome. There was no missing or unclear information, making the point 10B not applicable. After these, the bias assessment was done using the Cochrane Collaboration's risk of bias tools. For non-RCTs, Newcastle-Ottawa was used. There were 13 RCTs and 2 cohorts that were included. There was an individual bias assessment done for each study, where for each type of bias, the green shows a low risk of bias. Yellow is an unclear risk of bias, whereas the red marks were a high risk of bias. The bias was checked in the form of selection bias for random sequence generation, the allocation concealment, blinding of participants and personnel or a performance bias, blinding of the outcome assessment, which was the detection bias, and incomplete outcome data or any dropouts and the attrition bias, or selective reporting, which was the reporting bias. After all of these were analyzed, the bias assessment of the entire study was summarized as below. Most studies had a low risk of selection bias. Performance and detection bias were concerns because of poor blinding in some of the studies. Allocation concealment and selective reporting were unclear in some cases. Hence, we need to be cautious about interpretation of the result. So the risk of bias assessment also was met. I am not going to read through the full table, but skip to the points of the checklist. This is just showing that each study, the study design, the author, the year, the location, the experimental group, the control group, the intervention measures in experimental and control group, and which all outcomes out of those 6 were measured, were highlighted in this table. So the effect measures were specifically mentioned for each, and tabulating the study intervention characteristics was done. Again, any methods required to prepare the data and handling a missing summary was not applicable. The statistical tools used were professional statistical softwares. Outcome data from each study was tested for heterogeneity by the I-square statistic test. Because there was heterogeneity found, which I'll come to later, both fixed effects and random effects models were applied. The outcomes were calculated as risk ratio and mean differences with a 95% confidence interval of the outcomes. Sensitivity analysis were performed for all statistically significant results, and significance was taken as p-value less than 0.05. The stability and reliability of the results were examined by excluding certain studies serially and reanalyzing them. Begg's test and Egger's regression analysis was used to test for publication bias. Heterogeneity analysis was done by the I-square test, which was more than 75% in most analyses. On an average, the I-square test, so just to give a reminder, I-square test of less than 25, less than 50% is a low heterogeneity. 50 is considered a moderate, whereas more than 75 is a high heterogeneity. The potential causes of high variability were the different patient populations, like the age and severity of the pneumonia, different IVIG dosages and treatment durations. There was a mix of RCTs and cohort studies, as I mentioned earlier. All the studies were from China, mostly giving rise to a possible regional bias, and some were smaller sample sizes, which could affect the results. To account for this heterogeneity, we used a random effects model along with a fixed effect model to give reliable results. The publication bias, as I mentioned earlier, was assessed by the funnel plot and Beggs and Eggers statistical tests. The funnel plot exhibited that the outcome of some studies fell outside the funnel plot, like these, indicating the heterogeneity or the bias. Overall funnel plot showed better symmetry, implying a smaller likelihood of the publication bias. And Beggs and Eggers regression analysis, which they conducted, showed no statistically significant differences. Hence, it is shown that there is no significant publication bias as a whole despite the heterogeneity. To further confirm this, a sensitivity analysis was done by serially omitting one study each and reanalyzing the results. And still it showed similar results, suggesting a good, robust model and good sensitivity and good reliability. So regarding the synthesis methods, bias assessment, and the certainty assessment, it was done very thoroughly and very transparently, and it meets all the checkpoints of PRISMA. Coming to the main point, the meta-analysis results. Meta-analysis of a systematic review is always been a point of confusion, and the forest plot has always seemed very intimidating to try to interpret. So starting off with this joke, let's explain how to go about interpreting a forest plot before we come to the individual forest plots of each outcome. So just to revise how to interpret a forest plot, the forest plot is divided into two sides. This entire part is the tabular format, whereas this is the graphical format. We'll begin with the tabular format. This column 1 has the studies listed one after the other. The studies are listed typically by the name of author and the year that they were done in. With each study, if we trace them horizontally in the row, the first will be the number of events studied for that outcome and the total for the intervention group. If there is a diagnostic test, it would be listed for the diagnostic test. Then the same will be listed for the control. Another column will give you the weight given to that study in that systematic review. The weight is determined by the confidence interval, the heterogeneity, the sample size, where studies with a larger sample size will typically be given a higher weight. And the outcomes are given as a risk ratio. The data could be dichotomous or it could be contiguous. So it could be expressed as an odds ratio or a risk ratio, or it could be expressed as a standardized mean or a mean difference. If we come below the list of the studies, we get the total confidence interval, where we have the total number of subjects in each of the control and intervention group. The weight of all the studies together should add up to 100%. And the risk ratio of all the studies pooled together is written here in bold, whereas the numbers in brackets signify the confidence interval limits. The total number of events are listed. Heterogeneity can be tested by either chi-square testing, I-square testing, and as I told earlier, that I-square of less than 25 is low heterogeneity. 50 is around 50 to 55 is moderate, and anything above 75% has a high heterogeneity. The last is the test for overall effect with a Z value, and this is considered significant with p-value less than 0.05. This data is exactly what is represented in the graphical format on the right side. On the right side, we'll begin with the x-axis, which can give an outcome based on what we decide. So either the risk ratio could be the risk ratio. On the left of the line would favor the experimental outcome, and on the right of the line shows favors the control. This vertical line at 1, or it may be at 0, depending on how the outcome is measured, is called the line of no effect. And any outcome falling on that line shows that there is no significant difference between the groups if the confidence interval crosses the line of no effect. In individual studies, we can see the length of the line. Some lines are shorter, whereas some lines are longer. That depicts the 95% confidence interval. So a narrow confidence interval will be given a higher weightage than one with a broader confidence interval. The square in the center estimates gives the point estimate, which gives the true effect in the population of that study. And the size of the square varies as per the weight given to that study. So as we see here, study 6 has been given a weight of 46. It has a larger sample size of 110. Hence, and it has a smaller confidence interval. Hence, the square is bigger as compared to maybe this one, where it's a sample size of only 40 in study 5, weight is only 6%. This is a summary and a quick interpretation of the forest plot. If we keep this in mind to analyze each and every outcome of the meta-analysis of the systematic review, each outcome is depicted by its own forest plot. Coming to the first one, the clinical efficacy rate of azithromycin combined with IVIG in treating RMPP. So here, if we keep the principles of interpretation of the forest plot in mind, all the studies are listed out here. These are all the studies that considered this outcome. The reason for heterogeneity in all the studies is that all of the RCTs did not analyze all of the outcomes. Hence, these are only the studies that actually accounted for this outcome based on the efficacy rate criteria, which I had mentioned earlier. This is the weight of the individual studies and the risk ratio. The risk ratio they were analyzed by a common effect or a fixed effect as well as a random effect, and both of them showed similar results, 1.21 and 1.818, which signifies that despite the moderate heterogeneity of 55%, the studies were the results were reliable and almost the same. We see that the confidence intervals of most of the studies did not cross the line, and the results were reliable. Heterogeneity was 55%, and all of the studies are showing that there was a significant improvement in the improvement in the efficacy of azithromycin combined with IVIG versus azithromycin alone. The next outcome was analyzed as it was the time of defervescence of fever for patients with IVIG azithro versus only azithromycin. Again, in similar pattern, the studies were enlisted. The weight given, the highest weight was given to this study by Jin et al. In 2022. All of them showed a mean difference of less than 0. A mean difference of less than 0 implies that the data is less in the first group, whereas more in the second group, which shows that the time to defervescence was less in the experimental group as compared to the control group, showing a higher efficacy again of azithromycin with IVIG as compared to azithro alone. This had a high heterogeneity as shown by the I-square more than I-square 95, and it was the common effect as well as random effects model was used. They showed a significant difference, but both of them had a p-value less than 0.05, and hence they were considered statistically significant. None of the studies' confidence interval over here crossed the line of no effect. Hence, these studies' outcomes were significant. Similarly, the third outcome was the disappearance time of pulmonary rales for patients with RMPP with azithro plus IVIG as the experimental group. Again, I'm just going to summarize quickly. The mean difference of all of them were less than 0, signifying that the time to disappearance of the rales were lesser in the combination treatment than with azithro alone. This outcome also was analyzed by random effect due to the high heterogeneity, but the overall effect had a p-value of less than 0.05 and in random effects, and hence was considered statistically significant. The fourth outcome, time to disappearance of cough, was also analyzed along similar lines. The mean difference of all the studies with all the weightage and the confidence intervals were again less than 0, showing a significant decrease in the time for disappearance of cough in patient with RMPP with azithro and IVIG as compared to azithro alone. Again, it was a high heterogeneity analyzed by random effects model, p-value less than 0.01, and it was considered statistically significant. The fifth one is the hospital length of stay of patients with RMPP treated with azithro and IVIG. There were only 5 studies which considered this outcome, which analyzed this outcome in their patients. The maximum weightage was given to these studies, almost equal in all of them, June 2022. But again, none of the confidence interval crossed the line of no effect. The mean difference of all was less than 0. Analyzed by common effect and random effect in view of the high heterogeneity, did not show any significant difference. The overall effect was a p-value less than 0.05 and hence was statistically significant. The incidence of adverse reactions in patients with RMPP with and without IVIG treated with azithromycin was compared. The systematic review article itself did not specify what all adverse effects were considered, but they were mentioned in a few of the individual articles. This outcome shows all the studies that were considered crossing the line of no effect, as well as this is the pooled effect in the form of a diamond, and that is also crossing the line of no effect, which shows no significant statistical difference in the incidence of adverse reactions in the experimental and control group. This had low heterogeneity, and it was statistically insignificant. The difference was statistically insignificant. After analyzing these, we put them in the checkbox and noticed that all the checkpoints were covered: the study selection, characteristics, bias, individual study results, the result of the synthesis. For each synthesis, all investigations, all sensitivity analysis, reporting biases, and certainty of evidence. Coming to the final part of the article, which is the discussion or the summary. The discussion of the article or the summary stated that lung injury in refractory Mycoplasma pneumoniae is due to the direct microbial injury and exaggerated immune response of the host with release of inflammatory cytokines, rather than only because of the direct microbial injury. Even literature and our textbooks have shown that mostly extrapulmonary manifestations were seen due to the exaggerated immune response. This has studied that even refractory Mycoplasma pneumonia could be due to exaggerated immune response. The treatment with IVIG along with azithromycin showed improved efficacy, shorter hospital stay, faster defervescence without any significant adverse effects. And the reason for this was also mostly because adjuvant therapy was required as an immunomodulatory or immunosuppressive therapy. The strengths of this study were, despite high heterogeneity, all the studies showed that IVIG plus azithromycin was better than azithromycin alone, and the conclusion remained strong. It was a large sample size analyzed among all those 15 studies, with the total patients analyzed were 1142. So it was statistically powerful. The sensitivity analysis showed stable results even when done after serially omitting one study at a time. There was no major publication bias detected, and the random effects model used, accounting for all the differences in the study and the heterogeneity in the population, made the conclusions more generalizable. The study was not without its limitations. The high heterogeneity did limit the strength of the study, even though we accounted for it. The collected articles that I found after cross-referencing the literature were all from China, which introduces a regional limitation or a regional bias. Varying populations with their varying genetic makeup have different responses to IVIG, and the individual differences of the treatment approach have not been standardized and have not been addressed on a larger scale. There were dosage variations of both IVIG and azithromycin among the included studies, and that could have influenced the results of this meta-analysis. There was no standardized duration of treatment also mentioned in any of the studies. In conclusion, we know that IVIG used significantly improves RMPP outcomes. There were no additional safety concerns or adverse effects. High heterogeneity requires caution in interpretation and application to the general population. This gives us the scope for future research. The scope for research is using standardized IVIG dosing trials with standardized treatment regimes. We also need to evaluate for the long-term efficacy and safety and the rationality of this combination and study the mechanism of action in detail. There is very limited literature on the comparison of IVIG versus glucocorticoids in refractory Mycoplasma pneumoniae, which is important to our setup, especially because IVIG being very expensive, not available in most places, makes it a difficult treatment modality to have all over. We need multi-center trials outside China to make it more generalizable to the rest of the population. So the discussion gives the general interpretation, discuss the limitations and strength, and also helped in discussing the implications of the results for practice on a larger scale. The other information like the study protocol, the support, there was no funding available, the data availability was there, author details and reports of the data and the data used for analysis. All of them were easily available to study, and there were no competing interests by any of the authors. The limitations in clinical application, if we have to consider it for daily use or our practice, is that diagnostic tests for Mycoplasma pneumoniae in the current scenario are still not widely available. And if they are available, they are still expensive. The ways that we diagnose Mycoplasma in our day-to-day practice would be usually by a single serum IgM, or a Mycoplasma multiplex PCR in the nasopharyngeal. Sorry, yes, sir. Sir, Dr. Bafna, sir, there's a question or a credit question.
We'll discuss later.
Okay, sir.
Are you done with your this completed?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. That's done with the limitations and the lack of data. Glucocorticoids would be a more cost-effective and practical solution if we can use it, and there is evidence. So that's all, ma'am. Thank you very much, everyone, for listening.
Thank you, Dr. Tanvi. That was quite an elaborate discussion of the article. Before I go on to the questions that are there in the chat box, I would like Dr. Matthews to give us some comments on this presentation.
Yeah, thank you. Dr. Tanvi has done a good job of summarizing everything which is there in the study. I'm not very clear why that initial story about Times of India news report and all was shown, because that is not related to this paper at all. Now, the two fatal flaws with this publication are, one is their definition of this thing which they call RMPP, and the second is the criteria they use to show response to therapy. Now, those two things are the major problems with this particular paper, which makes the results questionable or difficult to believe. That is what we mean by internal validity. Once those things had been, if they had been addressed properly, then of course we could have considered further to look at the results and so on and so forth. So this is a good publication for us to see how things, can be, I won't use the word twisted, but how things can be presented in such a way so as to convey something which may or may not be actually present, to put it in a very mild way. But she has done a thorough job of looking at, whatever could have been done. So well done on that. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
So Dr. Matthews, do you think that this?
Yeah.
Yes, Tanu, please.
I have a serious problem with this paper. Actually, we shouldn't have considered this paper at all, because the whole definition of RMPP is flawed. In China, where you have 90% macrolide resistance, how can you call a patient not responding to macrolides refractory Mycoplasma pneumonia? Because the non-response to macrolides can be resistance. In fact, if you look at the definition of RMPP, it says that you give macrolides. If the patient doesn't respond to macrolides, give doxycycline. And then if the patient doesn't get better, then you think of RMPP. So actually, their entire definition of refractory Mycoplasma pneumoniae is incorrect. And then also to say that there is not enough data about, glucocorticoids. There are two, even from China, I don't know how they got ethical approval also to do this study, because obviously if your patient in China, if your patient is not responding to macrolides, you would first give a different antibiotic before you would start giving IVIG. I mean, if in my country a patient has Mycoplasma pneumoniae and my resistance rates are so high, before I start giving IVIG, I would give another antibiotic to the patient, isn't it? Because I know there is this whole discussion about whether antibiotics alter the course of mycoplasma, but we have seen in our clinical practice that, especially in the past year, that patients don't respond to macrolides. We change to doxy and they get better. We don't jump on and give immunomodulatory drugs to them. So, in fact, if you look at this, because we have done a very good job of analyzing the meta-analysis, but the basic premise of doing that, those randomized controlled trials, that itself is flawed, because the patient is not responding to macrolides. They're giving IVIG. Now, if you use an immunomodulator or you use steroids, the patient will automatically get better. They have not even talked about how many patients didn't respond and what they didn't do to those. So, I mean, personally, the analysis of the analysis of how they went on to do their meta-analysis is good, but the whole paper, I think, is flawed. I mean, that is my comment.
Thank you, Dr. Tanu.
No, but one thing we have to accept is, see, the basic papers may be flawed, but she's only analyzing the so-called publication under review, which is some kind of synthesis of all these things together. So the rationale for doing those RCTs and all that doesn't come in her domain. The only thing which I think you could have added extra to this is the fact that their definitions are inappropriate. So starting point being unclear, there is not much value in continuing further. But otherwise, you have examined it.
No. So I fully agree with that. So maybe you should have started with because when you said that the definition, because you start with the definition, so maybe you should have said that the definition is incorrect. The definition, because that is the most important point. The definition of RMPP is incorrect.
Then very important thing is that they have not mentioned How did they diagnose smallpox pneumonia? Because they have not mentioned the test they use, whether they use serology or they use PCR. It is not mentioned anywhere. So we are still not very sure that how did they come to the conclusion that the diagnosis was MPP.
No, that they must have mentioned in their individual studies, I'm sure. Because I know, see, if you do a literature review and you find that all the publications in Mycoplasma are from China, I mean, they have cohort sizes of 1,000, 2,000 patients, and they usually do PCRs. They are, in fact, even doing PCRs where they pick up the mutations for macrolide resistance. So I don't think there is a problem with the diagnosis of Mycoplasma here. I don't think. And I also know, because when you go and read their publications, they are very reluctant to changing to second-line antibiotics because they have concerns about using doxycycline in children. They have concerns about using levoflox in children. Even if you look at the guidelines, which the Chinese Society published in 2023 about treatment of Mycoplasma, they still mention macrolides as their drugs of choice, which is difficult to understand because they have so much macrolide resistance. They still talk about using macrolides as their drugs of first choice. So I don't really kind of think that their diagnosis was not correct, but I still feel that their definition was not correct. And what they do, I mean, when you look at their publications, the other publications which they have on Mycoplasma, is they are very quick to add immunomodulatory therapy. So they start macrolides, and then if the patients don't get better, rather than switching to an alternative antibiotic, they add steroids. In fact, there are two other meta-analysis or systematic reviews on where they have used glucocorticoids, either methylpred and a dose of 1 to 2 mg per kg per day, or Dexa 0.4 mg per kg per day, which have 2,300 children. Okay. One having 12 RCTs, the other having 11 RCTs. And they have shown excellent results. So I think in those cases also the diagnosis of RMPP must be macrolide failure.
It was, ma'am.
Yes. So I think we have a take-home message beyond what Tanvi has done to analyze the article is the basic pretext of diagnosing an RMPP. And I feel where the role of immunomodulators will come is when you have patients whom you have tried another antibiotic, or those who are so sick enough to have a cytokine related, like an immunomodulatory adverse effects to the patient, like if a patient who has got us because of the cytokines, the patient has a lot of inflammatory side effects, and that is the place where these immunomodulators maybe have some role, rather than giving it upfront when they are just macrolide resistant. And so if you have a very, very sick child whom we have tried two antibiotics, and that's possibly the place where we can look at immunomodulators, and maybe that was
No, we should hold on. See, there are two things going on. One is either we are discussing this paper or we are discussing everything outside the confines of this paper.
Yeah.
But today's journal club is related to the paper.
Correct.
So therefore, as Dr. Rawat correctly pointed out, nowhere in the paper is there a diagnosis or inclusion criteria of the individual studies given, which is suspect. So we can speculate that yes, because it's China, so they must have done this, they must have done that, but it's not given in the document. And these things are fatal enough for us to not bother about the results which are presented. We are not concerned about whether we can use IVIG, whether their study can be replicated in Indian setting. That is all outside the scope of the discussion currently. The current thing is that this paper, which we have analyzed in great detail, has no merit for us to consider for the believability of the results in their own setting for the reasons which have been given. Already somebody has asked in the chat box, have these people diagnosed Mycoplasma to the exclusion of other bacteria? Nobody knows, because nothing is given in this paper. No. So while it looks very exciting that they have found some IVIG giving benefit and all that, which may be true, there is no doubt about that, could be false also, but the data is just not there in the paper which has been discussed just now. So rest all doesn't matter, because we are only doing this for an exercise to look at this particular publication.
Then Dr. Modi, second point very important is that they had taken 13 RCTs for meta-analysis, but they have not analyzed the quality of studies, like for example, grid analysis, which tell us how good are the studies, because that will put the weight behind whatever data you're getting. So one major flaw is that they did assess the quality of the studies by grade and telling us how good are these studies. Again, this is a very important flaw.
I had a doubt over here. So, besides the bias assessment, they've only assessed the bias assessment to assess the quality of studies. They've not done any other.
Bias is only one point.
Yes,
You
there's
know,
only one point. They've not
grade has
done.
got to 5, 6 points. So you have done only bias.
Yes, sir.
Rest all you have not assessed. So I think that is again a very important flaw.
Right.
And then lack of blinding, because if you see your risk of bias in two particular areas where blinding of the participants and the assessment of the effect, that they had showed some serious bias. So
Yes,
that can indicate that probably the data you have to take with a pinch of salt, because there is some critical bias in those critical areas where blinding of the participants and the assessors and how do they collect the data, that had some serious flaws. So I think these 2 points are very important.
yes, so there was a performance bias and a detection bias definitely there because the allocation, the blinding was not well mentioned in all of the studies.
There are a couple of questions in the chat box. I think one we have already answered. Dr. Khushbu's, Dr. Bafna has asked, what is the duration of IV antibiotics, either macrolides or doxy, in the Mycoplasma pneumoniae? Is there any fixed guidelines for that? If a child is improving clinically after 2 to 3 days, IV antibiotics, when can we convert to oral, and what is the total duration of antibiotics in this case? I think this is, I think, beyond the purview of a journal club where we are discussing this article as such.
No, I have not asked this question. I don't know. To some other person. But I have one question. Can I ask?
Yes, please.
So these studies, I think the premise was immunological. The premise was using IVIG because there is a failure because it is the inflammatory reaction or immunological response, and therefore they did not use a second antibiotic and straight away went to IVIG, which is we were discussing. So did the studies tell you about how many studies have non-pulmonary manifestations, or did they talk about any non-pulmonary manifestations, or did they give any data about non-pulmonary manifestations? Because that is the premise probably was for using IVIG, and they did not actually use the second antibiotic. So Tanvi, could you find any data about that? How many patients?
Then not in this study, none of them specified any extrapulmonary manifestations. There were other case reports and case series which I conducted, but which I found on encephalitis where they first used IVIG, but again,
No, in this study particularly the
No, sir.
RCT, no. So
No,
that's
sir,
again one more problem, because usually for pneumonia you would go for second antibiotic rather than IVIG.
No, so they are not in this, they are not defined as refractory Mycoplasma pneumoniae. They are
Absolutely,
going to
yeah.
the severe category where there would be
Yeah.
definitely a role of immunomodulatory therapy.
So I think there was an article which I had read recently to just answer your question, Dr. Bafna. There were some criteria which were defined where you would use immunomodulatory therapy, that if you have a severe hemolytic anemia in mucositis, like you have Steven Johnson like effect, that's the place where immunomodulatory drugs have been used. Where as your extrapulmonary manifestations, where there is some
Absolutely. So if you have a lot of extrapulmonary manifestations, they tell you about the immunological reaction, hepatitis or encephalitis, stomatitis.
Dr. Manyar has asked, if there is a difference in the dosage of IVIG, can they be clubbed under the same meta-analysis? If the study is using different dosages, can it be used? Can it be clubbed in the same meta-analysis?
No, that was mentioned in the limitations and the reasons for the high heterogeneity. So that was accounted for using the random effects model, but that stays to be a limitation that the doses were not standardized, neither of the IVIG nor of the macrolides, and with the duration also.
Dr. Matthews, should that be included in the same meta-analysis if different doses of IVIG are used?
It can be if the broad question is IVIG plus azithromycin versus azithromycin alone, then one can include all the doses and then subgroup them and see different doses, how they have worked.
All right. There were some other questions by Dr. Kuku. Are there studies showing incidence of MRPP in India, RMPP in India?
There were mostly
No, there are no studies of mycoplasma itself which are showing that mycoplasma is a major problem. That itself is not there. So RMPPs, of course, doesn't come into the picture.
See, the problem with mycoplasma diagnostics is a big issue. When you do a serology, also you cannot really time it whether it is and whether it is at that point of time or a person is
Yeah.
positive with the serology with the past infection. Even if you do a PCR, you could have mycoplasma as a commensal, and that could
Yeah.
may not really relate to the infection. The other thing is, even if you there may be some benefit in doing serology, like repeating it to see a fourfold increase in the titer. So some extent there you can prove it, but otherwise, and even you can't culture it. So that is another problem of this species. So I think even diagnosing mycoplasma is a big problem. So then diagnosing resistance becomes a further big problem. So that is the limitation of this kind of infection that we see.
So for that matter, that again it's very important to see any study what is the criteria they have used to diagnose NPP, because the diagnostic criteria is not clear. We are really not sure that whether the study inferences they are true or not, because we don't have the criteria how they have diagnosed NPP.
Yeah. So, but I think what Dr. Tanvi, I think the way you have analyzed the study, which is good, and it also debunks where your basic pretext, where you're using the criteria for diagnosing itself is doubtful, then the whole study falls apart. But it's a good exercise done to analyze the study.
Dr. Tanvi,
Yeah.
as this IVIG is very costly drugs and this is not available in very government setup, or even the private people are also not affording it. Have you find any study of cost benefit analysis in using IVIG versus dexamethasone?
No, sir. So I could not find any literature comparing the efficacy of two. I probably like if I do a more extensive search, I don't know, I might find more, but with the amount that I've searched, I did not find any literature on the comparative of the two.
Dr. Tanu, would you like to make any comments?
As I said, that there are enough studies on adjuvant steroids in RMPP, and they've shown good outcomes with steroids also. So, I mean, we had a couple of patients with refractory mycoplasma pneumoniae where you used confirmed mycoplasma, where you used doxycycline, didn't get better, used steroids, and they got better. So, I mean, in our setup, if you had RMPP, and you were sure that you had RMPP and you didn't have any other cause, we would use steroids, wouldn't use IVIG. But I think that is not the point of this journal club, and we are deviating. I mean, I would like to compliment her that her understanding of statistics is so good, because I didn't understand all those things about the systematic review and those things. Tanvi, you must have really, really worked hard to understand, and the way you explained the forest plot, that was really commendable. And
Thank you,
that's
ma'am.
really very good, because
Thank
I
you,
think the
ma'am.
entire purpose is, but maybe in the next thing, you would probably choose a systematic review where the question itself was, a better question. I mean, here, we had a issue with the question itself. So maybe the question should be a more valid question than it would have been, but you analyzed it well. I mean, Joseph is, I think, the expert here. He's very good. So I think he would be able to comment more on the way she analyzed the systematic review. And Joseph, you have any comments about that?
Madam, I think it's okay. Their presentation is forest plot and something like that, but the message is also important, ma'am. I think so. If we are giving the message that we use this IVIG straightforward with azithromycin, then the message is going in a wrong way. It's okay, forest plot and other things, another analysis, it's okay. But the message is also clear to the audience. I think so.
Yeah, so I think that that is very important, that nobody who's hearing this webinar should go with the message of using IVIG in Mycoplasma pneumonia, at least. I think that is very, very important, that the definition of refractory Mycoplasma pneumonia is not this, not that the patient doesn't respond to macrolide. I think first is be sure you're dealing with Mycoplasma. If you're giving macrolides and the patient is not better in 3 days, consider resistance. Change to an alternative drug, which is doxycycline. If the patient is not getting better, think of other possibilities, and then only think of RMPP. And then if you have to use an immunomodulatory drug, use steroids. I mean, that would be my message to the audience.
I've done the message.
Ma'am, I have a doubt, madam. Can I? Hello?
Yeah.
Yeah, ma'am, I'm Dr. Kasi Bandaru. Madam, actually, many of the time, Indu Koshla madam said, diagnosing Mycoplasma pneumonia is very difficult on the laboratory basis. As far as I know, because many of the complicated pneumonias, the first common cause Mycoplasma with sometimes will be combined with Streptococcus pneumonia also, madam. We don't know whether we are treating with the Streptococcus pneumonia or Mycoplasma pneumonia. See, many of the people as a pulmonologist will still give that Streptococcus pneumonia is one of the first common cause to be think in either a simple pneumonia or a complicated pneumonia. So many of the times I saw a combined, they are showing a Mycoplasma pneumonia as well as a Streptococcus pneumonia. So in that context, so treating Streptococcus pneumonia will be better than Mycoplasma pneumonia, because Mycoplasma pneumonia usually will be self-limiting, or sometimes it may improve with the other drugs also, madam. And azithromycin, coming to azithromycin, people are using left and right azithromycin, madam. Even a drug pharmacist will sell the azithromycin, even RMP will sell azithromycin, everyone and all. So I want a respiratory chapter to get a strong guidelines about how to diagnose Mycoplasma, madam. Mycoplasma, we are unable to diagnose Mycoplasma, madam. So that is a major issue, and the cost issue is very high, madam. Streptococcus pneumonia by throat swab we can diagnose, but when it comes to Mycoplasma pneumonia, they're asking 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 rupees also, madam.
Dr. Manjunath, that is a limitation of the organism, and the guidelines are going to be difficult to make when we have limitation in investigative facilities. The other one message that I thank Dr. Tanu for summarizing it, and maybe this article brought out something which somebody else would have read it and started using IVIG, so we could have thrashed it out and maybe restrained people from using it. But the other thing that I wanted to point out is the second line of drug is doxycycline, and it is now cleared for use even for younger children, and you can give it to children younger. Earlier, because of the staining of the teeth, it was said that it should not be used, but now they have cleared for use. And you can give it even up to 21 days without any problem, as per up to date. The other thing is the third molecule is levofloxacin, and the message that I want to give is please use doxycycline over levofloxacin, because we don't want to use that in our country because of the MDR-TB. So these are the other messages that I wanted to give. And if there are any more comments from Dr. Rawat or Dr. Ajay Kumar, otherwise we'll wind up this session then.
Matthew sir, can you comment, final comment from your side?
No, I think somebody has very nicely, Dr. Maniar has written the last comment in the chat box, that the purpose of a journal club is not to guide the listeners about what they should do and what they should not do. It's an academic exercise. We have looked at a topic which is interesting, not relevant to our setting all the same, but it's okay. It's an interesting topic, and somebody in China has published a paper on it, and we have analyzed it and asked some questions and had a good discussion on it. So I think the purpose of the journal club is achieved. A journal club cannot guide what we should be doing or what we should not be doing. So that part is absolutely fine.
Excellent. So I think Dr. Tanvi have done an excellent job of analyzing the article, and I think you have done it very well. The basic aim of these sessions are to critically analyze and appraise an article so that we learn how to go ahead, so that we don't take blindly whatever is mentioned in that particular article under the face value. So you have rightly pointed out the way in which you critically analyze an article, appraise an article, and how to, so that we came to a very important conclusion that although article looks very impressive, but again, there are serious flaws and we should not take whatever findings are on the face value. So thank you very much. I thank Dr. Matthew, Dr. Tanu Singhal, Dr. Indu Khosla for their presence in this particular very important meeting. I'd like to thank Dr. Ajay Kumar for coordinating this event, and very importantly, I'll like to thank Tanvi for an excellent presentation. I'd like to thank all the delegates who were there on board today evening for their comments and for their questions. We again will meet next month on the last Wednesday. Again, we'll come with another article where we'll analyze, appraise, and we'll discuss. But my request is that please restrict yourself to the article itself. There could be a lot of theoretical aspect to the particular subject, but there we are not interested in that. We are really interested how to critically analyze and get a important inference whether this information is of importance or not. So thank you very much. Till we meet again next time. Good
Thank
night.
you for the opportunity, and thank you, Indu ma'am, for the guidance.
Okay. Thank you.
Good night, ma'am.
Sure.
Well done, Tanvi, well done.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you.
Well done, Tanvi. Well done.
Great job.
Thank you, ma'am.
Okay.